First tonight, accountability after Uvalde. It's been nearly 4 months since 19 fourth graders and 2 teachers were murdered inside Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas.
Since May 24th, the actions of responding law enforcement agencies have really been under a microscope. Officers waited in that school hallway for 77 minutes as the gunman remained in the classroom with the victims.
Multiple government agencies have launched investigations into the police response to find out if any officers should face disciplinary action or criminal charges. One of the responding agency that's begun to investigate its officers is the Texas Department of Public Safety. Today, KVUE senior reporter Tony Plohetski sat down with DPS Director Steven McCraw for his first in-depth television interview since the tragedy happened in Uvalde. And Tony joins us in studio tonight with excerpts from that interview. Tony, I can only imagine just being there for that conversation.
It was a wide-ranging, extensive conversation, and certainly with all of these conversations that we've been having, the documents that we have received, the videos we have seen, our learning continues to grow about the flawed law enforcement response that day. Certainly there have been a lot of fingers pointed at the Uvalde School District Police as well as the Uvalde City Police, particularly the School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo. But one of the questions I asked Steve McCraw today was basically, why didn't DPS take over the scene as it was unfolding on May 24th? And let's listen to what he had to say. Why do you suspect they didn't do more to really find out? Why not be more assertive when there is possibly someone with a high-power weapon on a school campus? I mean, we know law enforcement can be quite assertive or aggressive when they want to be. So why did they not bring that to bear in this case?
Well, there's no question it should have been brought to bear. As I mentioned before, you don't stop until the threat is terminated, plain and simple, and that didn't happen. What I can say is that you don't immediately question the information. The best information is always inside, and it's the arriving officers, and it's going to be the on-scene command. That's the best information you can get, and we traditionally rely on that information to make decisions. And when a decision's been made and information is relayed that the subject is contained, that it's a barricaded subject, that we have time and do the usual situations where you call out the individual, you call for SWAT, all these things are consistent with a barricaded subject. It looks like that, and frankly, you know, law enforcement, we don't question that based upon the ones that have the most information, the best information. That's always going to be the ranking official that's first on the scene, and that happens to be in the hallway where the attack occurred.
Tony's still here with us. We're about 4 months out from this all happening, and as you mentioned going into that soundbite, multiple agencies responded. This is just one part of the equation here, isn't it?
Keep in mind, DPS had the second highest number of officers on the scene that day, 91. The U.S. Border Patrol, though, actually had the most officers there that day. We know that the Border Patrol has said they are doing an internal inquiry. DPS is doing an administrative review of the performance of its officers, as well as the city of Uvalde has hired an outside consultant to review the actions of its officers to determine whether or not they violated any department policies and should face any sort of disciplinary action.
And we really haven't heard much outside of this interview with DPS, the other entities not really saying a whole lot.
And in recent days, we have seen the attention on DPS, frankly, continue to grow, which was why this conversation was so important with Steve McCraw today. Another aspect of our conversation today is that we've seen this wildly shifting narrative that started on May 24th with law enforcement and the governor saying that police responded heroically that day. We now know that that is not what happened. I talked to Steve McCraw about that today and the origins of that. He called it a myth that police were heroes. Let's listen to what. I want to ask you, because you mentioned it as well, this idea that sprang forth in the hours and first couple of days after the shooting, your personnel said it publicly in interviews. The governor, frankly, said it. Federal authorities said it as well, and that is this idea that the police officers and other law enforcement personnel acted heroically. how and why in the world was that something that so quickly got disseminated and yet was so terribly wrong?
Well, I was at the same briefing that the governor was, and senators were, and congressmen, and certainly local elected officials and others. And frankly, obviously the first reported information, okay, was that there was 500 children were rescued as a result of the brave actions of law enforcement. And there was no real reason to question that initially, okay, and where the focus of the investigation and immediately from our standpoint, anybody's standpoint, is the victim identification and family notification. Those are the priority of priorities, and to get information. We were depending on information that came from, okay, those on the scene and those in command on the scene, and that information was relayed at a particular meeting. In fact, it was Wednesday morning briefing that I sat in, and in fact, one of our regional director, Victor Escalon, did the briefing, after a local official passed out and was unable to do it. He was asked to do the briefing, and he relayed exactly what he was told, okay, by two individuals. I'm not going to mention their names, okay, but the exact information he provided in that regard.
Well, Tony, for so many people, it's almost inconceivable that the law enforcement that was there that day were hailed as heroes. Now that we've heard from the parents, we've seen the video where they stood in the hallway for 77 minutes. I know the backlash has been swift, it's been brutal, and it is still going on.
People describe being very, that this idea that police performed heroically was galling to them and has really piled on the amount of anger and upset in that community. And so to that end, I did ask Colonel McCraw in our final question today whether or not he had a message for the people of Uvalde. Any closing remarks to the community of Uvalde, to the citizens of Texas, with regard to the performance of your agency that day and any pledge going forward?
Well, we'll hold everybody accountable in the department that didn't live up to the expectations, not just criminal culpability, okay, or even misconduct, okay, but certainly anything that we think that they lacked in performance, we're going to do that, plain and simple. And it's not. Our troops expect that. We routinely engage in that type of accountability. The only thing I can say that really matters is that, and we'll certainly share that information as soon with the public and the family members. I prefer to share it with the family members first. I don't expect that they're going to appreciate, whatever, and I don't think there's never enough. I can never say enough and do enough for those family members and the community.
A fair point. As we move forward now, we know that 7 of those DPS troopers are part of this investigation, under investigation. What happens from this day forward, Tony?
This is important. There has been a lot of conversation about whether or not some of those responding officers could face criminal charges brought by a grand jury in Uvalde, of course, spearheaded by the district attorney in that community. The colonel and I talked about that today. He did not say whether or not he believes that there will be charges or should be charges, but rest assured, he absolutely gave the impression that the DA in that community is strongly considering it, and essentially gave the impression that he would not be surprised if it happened. Did not go as far as to say he believes it should, but definitely believes that it could.
All right, Tony, thank you so much for being with us and
Thank you
for that sit-down interview. And Tony had many more questions for Director McCraw.
You can, in fact, watch the entire 45-minute interview right now at KVUE.com, on our KVUE YouTube page, and on KVUE Plus. That's available on Roku and Amazon Fire TV.